Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where President Trump's grip on the Republican Party appears stronger than ever, despite tumbling approval ratings with voters heading into the midterms. Today, the president celebrating another victory in his revenge campaign against his Republican critics, after Republican Congressman Thomas Massie was defeated by Trump-backed challenger Ed Gallrein in the most expensive House primary in history. In his victory speech, Gallrein pledged to support the president, while Massie encouraged his party to exercise some independence. Take a listen.
My focus is on advancing the president's and the party's agenda to put America first and Kentucky always.
If the legislative branch always votes with the president, we do have a king. If the legislative branch always votes whichever way the wind is blowing, then we have mob rule. But if the legislative branch and the representatives and the senators that serve with it always follow the Constitution, we have a republic.
The president's pick in Kentucky's Republican Senate primary, Andy Barr, also won. But in Georgia, President Trump's pick in the governor's race, Burt Jones, did not hit the 50% needed and now heads to a runoff against billionaire Rick Jackson. The Georgia Republican Senate primary also heading to a runoff. The winner of that race will take on Senator Jon Ossoff in a matchup we'll be watching closely in November. Congressman Massie's defeat is the latest data point, emboldening President Trump to pursue an even greater MAGA makeover of his party. It follows the defeat of Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, who voted to convict the president during his 2021 impeachment, and the ousting of 5 Indiana state senators who rejected the president's redistricting plan. Today, House Speaker Mike Johnson defending the president's involvement in primary races.
I talked with the president late last night after everything all the dust was settling over all the elections, and we talked about how his endorsement is the most powerful in the history of politics. I mean, anywhere in the world. I think it's just a phenomenon. America is back, and that's because we've been running an agenda, again, based on common sense that achieves so many of those things I just said and more. We need people here who understand that, who are not trying to carve out their own lane and do something that's destructive or counterproductive, I think, to the agenda. We don't demand loyalty to the president. What I demand as Speaker of the House is loyalty to our core principles.
Ahead of next week's Senate runoff in Texas, the president also now endorsing the state's controversial Attorney General Ken Paxton over incumbent Senator John Cornyn. It's a decision that has rankled many of Cornyn's Republican colleagues on Capitol Hill, who worry it could put the seat in jeopardy this November.
Supremely disappointed. Supremely.
Speechless.
Yeah, it'll just cost us a fortune. I'm sad. That's all.
Today, the president dismissing those concerns, once again touting his record in these primaries so far.
They'll be all right with it. They want to win. I know how to win.
Are you worried about voters?
Some of them don't know how to win. I know how to win. I think I've proven that, haven't I?
Joining me now on set, fresh off her late night reporting assignment in Kentucky, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Tsirkin. Also with me, NBC News Chief White House correspondent Garrett Haake and NBC News Chief Data Analyst Steve Kornacki. Thanks to all of you for starting us off. Julie, let me start with you on set. You were at Massie's headquarters overnight. Talk to me about your takeaways, what you heard from him in that concession speech.
Kristen, I know all we're talking about now is just how much of an influence the president has over his party, how much control he clearly has. But I have kind of an under-the-radar take, and it comes from my reporting on the ground. I spoke to maybe about 20 voters, and I was so struck by the fact that most of those voters, even if they voted for Gallrein, they told me they don't like how much pressure the president has been putting in this race. Maybe this is a more independent part of the state. There's a lot of libertarian voters, but I was just struck by that fact. I really think that some of the aftershocks of last night may not yet be felt and might be felt as we get closer to the midterms and 2028, with people not really liking the fact that the president is consolidating power so blatantly.
Yeah, this, of course, comes after President Trump ousted Bill Cassidy. He had that big win in Indiana where 5 state senators went down in defeat who had defied President Trump. What are the broader implications right now for the Republican Party? How are leaders of the party, like House Speaker Mike Johnson, viewing all of this?
I mean, look, he's used to Thomas Massie being a thorn in his side. I don't necessarily think he expects him to be even more of a difficult member than he already has been. Certainly, Johnson told me that before the primary. But there's something that Thomas Massie said last night that I thought was really interesting. He said yesterday was the 6-month anniversary, the 6-month mark since the Epstein Files transparency law was passed. He looked at the voters who were pretty pumped up despite the loss, and he said, I have 7 months left, implying that he is going to be a roadblock at every chance he gets. And certainly we're seeing that in the Senate as well with Senator Cassidy. I mean, this is really their YOLO moment, as we've been talking about, and I expect they're going to use it.
Okay, let me follow up with you on that point, because you invoke Senator Cassidy, who for the first time after he was defeated over the weekend voted with Democrats on the War Powers Act, essentially trying to block President Trump from any further military involvement in Iran. He was pressed on this flip-flop, if you will. Tell me what he had to say.
I mean, he defended it. He said, yeah, look, I'm not running for office anymore. I do think at this point, you know, it's been 3 months since this war began. Voters need answers. He kind of reminded me of what I heard from Senator Tillis in our interview earlier this spring when he told me, look, obviously, I don't have to answer for my statements anymore, my votes, meaning at the polls in November. They feel free. They feel unleashed. But I do think this is going to be a problem for the president in the short term. We talked about those aftershocks he could potentially face as he tries to find a replacement in 2028 for the White House. I think in the short term, he has a lot he still wants Republicans to pass. Very slim majority in the House, a little bit more wiggle room in the Senate. But with his jabs at Cassidy, now picking Paxton over Cornyn, I think that's going to make his agenda a lot more difficult to get through the finish line.
Let's hear from Bill Cassidy. This is what he had to say when reporters asked him.
I know that's a narrative, but I've always said that I'm going to do whatever's best for my city, for my state, and my country. And if you think about what I'm answering, people always look past what your answer is into some narrative that they think underlies. Think about what I just said.
Julie, what do you make of this? And do you think this is going to be a real problem for President Trump?
I absolutely think so. I mean, they still have reconciliation to get through. That ballroom funding for, you know, to use for security. That's already been knocked out of the bill. It's not necessarily because of process. A big reason is because the president does not have the votes.
All right. Thank you so much for being here, Julie. Fantastic reporting overnight. I know you haven't slept much, so we appreciate your being here. Garrett, let me turn to you at the White House. You've been talking to your sources there. What's the mood today?
Well, look, they're perfectly happy with what they saw yesterday. The president continuing to flex his control over the Republican Party. They were touting this 37-0 number for the president's endorsees last night. They're particularly pleased to be rid of, at least eventually, of Thomas Massie. But I do think there's a little bit of an acknowledgement that a lot of this is just going to come from the president. I mean, I've not been able to find anybody who can identify for me a particular strategy behind, for example, the Paxton endorsement, other than to say that the president's going to make these choices himself. And a lot of times it comes down to his gut. And that's the situation where ultimately everyone else who works in this building has to ride with that.
Well, Garrett, let me ask you, because if you look at the polls, he is deeply underwater with the general electorate on key issues, especially the top issue for voters, Garrett, that you and I talk a lot about, the cost of living, the economy, inflation. Are there any voices in the president's ear warning him that this revenge tour that he's on could potentially backfire?
Look, I don't think they see these things as directly connected. The White House view when it comes to general election voters and numbers like the ones you just showed are that they've got time to turn them around. J.D. Vance yesterday in the briefing room was just as insistent as the president and others have been that when it comes to the economy, when it comes to gas prices, this is all hangs on the war with Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And if they can solve that riddle, they'll start to turn things back around. They also think they have a pretty good story to tell about some of the other things that the president has accomplished earlier in his term in terms of tax reform and, the elements that were in what they call the one big beautiful bill. Of course, that's not entirely within their control. Iran gets a vote on when the Iran war ends, too, and they have a demonstrated history going back to 1979 of being willing to essentially use their own ability to dictate elections in the United States. They may very well do so here. The White House doesn't have a good answer for that. But as to the kind of revenge tour over the last couple of months, they are confident that that won't negatively impact the president where it matters come November.
Garrett, I have to follow up with you on Texas. You and I spent a lot of time talking about this race last night when we were following all of these developments. The big concern inside the Republican Party is really about diverting resources, right?
Yeah.
What are your sources inside the Republican Party telling you about what the strategy is going to be now as it relates to Texas and those battlegrounds?
Ultimately, Republican strategists, campaign operatives that I talk to inside and outside of the White House all believe that Texas is and will remain a red state and that it will behave that way in November, but that it might be more expensive to get it to this point now. Nobody could make a logical argument for why it needed to be Ken Paxton who got the president's endorsement. It wasn't a logical choice. It was a gut call by the president, and it does make this race more expensive. But the thing about Texas here is you could make an argument that it could be a money pit for either side. Democrats are going to plow money into Texas to try to get James Tallarico over the finish line. And if Texas behaves like it has every election since the early 1980s, that could be a losing gambit for them, too. It'll be expensive. It'll be closely watched. And the history is what it is.
All right, Garrett Haake at the White House for us. Garrett, thank you so much for your great reporting, your great analysis overnight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Steve Kornacki, who was also up late with us, let me turn to you back at the big board in New York. Really appreciate your being here. We have to talk about the big race. Congressman Massie falling short in Kentucky. All eyes had been on that race. Why wasn't it enough? How was Ed Gallrein able to beat him last night?
Yeah, Kristen, what I think maybe is most significant when you look at this map is it kind of tells the story of President Trump and the Republican Party over the 10-year history of his national political career. When Donald Trump first ran for president in 2016, he ran in the Kentucky primary against Senator Ted Cruz. Trump won Kentucky, but this district in that primary, he actually lost. This was one of his weaker areas in Kentucky, and in particular, it was the suburbs of Cincinnati, these three counties right here that make up about half the population of this district. A lot of folks have looked at this district as it's Republican, but a more libertarian style of Republican, one that was more in sync with Massie and some of those objections that he would raise. He'd be the lone vote on all sorts of matters in the House. So there was a sense that this district, if there was a place where somebody could make a stand against Trump in a Republican primary, it would be Massie on sort of libertarian grounds in a place like this. And yet, even Massie couldn't survive in this district, and especially not in those Cincinnati suburbs. We saw them come in last night. Take a look at Boone County here. 10-point win for Gallrein. Next door in Kenton County, a little narrower, but still a Gallrein win. In Campbell, again, a little narrower, but still a Gallrein win. So this was supposed to be the kind of place that maybe the temperature in the Republican Party was a little bit different, a little bit more sympathetic to somebody who might stray in the way that Thomas Massie did. But ultimately, no. 10 years in now to Trump's national political career, even the 4th District of Kentucky. When he wants you out, you're out.
Yeah, it certainly made that point, Steve. And we're also tracking a number of races that have now gone into runoffs, which was expected, particularly some of those races in Georgia.
Yeah, take a look here. That Senate race, that Republican Senate race in Georgia, winner would get John Ossoff in November. June 16th will be the runoff here. Mike Collins, Derek Dooley. Dooley getting second place here, endorsed by Governor Brian Kemp. Interesting question here in the runoff will be President Trump not involved currently, has not endorsed anybody. Would he get involved here? Would he come in for Collins? Remember, Trump and Kemp do have a history. Would Trump see this as an opportunity to settle a score with Kemp, perhaps? Also in Georgia, that Republican governor's race is going to go to a runoff. Burt Jones, the lieutenant governor, does have Trump's endorsement. Rick Jackson, self-funder, spent heavily. He gets in second place. The two of them will square off. And in Alabama, on the Senate side, there will be a runoff as well. Barry Moore, congressman from South Alabama, he finishes first. He has Trump's endorsement. It was a close race for second, but former Navy SEAL Jared Hudson gets into second, so there's going to be a runoff also June 16th in Alabama. Again, Trump behind Moore. Hudson has aligned himself publicly with Trump. What role will Trump play here? Will he be coming in gung-ho for Moore, or is he going to send more of a message that he's okay with either choice?
Yeah, that's one of the big questions. And does he decide in that Georgia Senate race? We will be tracking it all. Steve Kornacki, so great to see you back at the big board for us. Thanks so much, my friend.
Thanks, Bridget.
Joining me now on set, NBC national political reporter Ben Kamisar and Bridget Bowman. Thanks to both of you for being here. The wind beneath our wings here in the NBC political unit. It's great to have both of you. Ben, let me start with you. Your biggest takeaways. Obviously, we talked about a lot of these races, but you have to put the Kentucky race front and center.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, for me, the president proved that he could beat an entrenched Republican based off of issues that actually Massie was probably more in line with the Republican base or what they say that they would want, right? I mean, this is not my unique take, but I thought it was fascinating that you think about the places where Massie broke with Trump, on the Epstein files, on government spending, on foreign spending. Those are the things that MAGA voters would say on paper, yeah, we support what he's selling. But in this race, Trump was able to use a force of personality to kind of trump all of that ideological divides.
It's actually a really fascinating point, Bridget, the fact that when you just look at Massie on paper, he's very MAGA. Let me ask you about this astonishing news in Texas. Here we were covering all of these other races. President Trump drops this bombshell. He's going to endorse Ken Paxton. We've been trying to figure out for months who was he going to endorse, was he going to endorse in this race. And the concern for Republicans is that it's going to divert resources from some of these other critical battleground states like North Carolina, for example, Ohio. Talk a little bit about the mood and what you're hearing about this decision to endorse.
Yeah, that concern is very real. And Garrett talked about this, too. It's because Texas is so expensive. There's like 20 media markets. It takes a lot of money to reach all of the voters in Texas. And Paxton has not been as strong of a fundraiser as Tallarico. He's going to need some of that outside help. And Republicans, as you alluded to, were already planning to spend on defense in some of these more Republican-leaning states as they try to shore up the majority. States like Ohio, states like Alaska, Iowa, these redder states that they have to play defense in. But Republicans also want to grow the majority, and they want to go on offense, too, in states like New Hampshire, for example. But if they have to keep spending on defense, does that limit the amount of money they have to spend on offense? We'll have to see, but it seems like Texas could certainly pull a lot of resources.
And what's your take on what the president decided to do in Texas and the broader implications here?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Bridget's point, it's the money piece, right? You know, in retrospect, one of those things we were spending so much time trying to figure out what the president was going to do. Maybe it was staring us in the face the whole time. You know, John Cornyn, obviously a long career in Texas, but as the kind of the establishment bulwark here, right? Paxton had been an ally of the president. Paxton played kind of a little bit of the political game. So all of a sudden, when the SAVE Act comes up, all of a sudden, Ken Paxton makes this declarative statement, I'll drop out if the leader decides that he will fast track the SAVE Act. I mean, you know, he was playing a smart MAGA kind of inside game here that ultimately played into a lot of the arguments that he was making, it specifically with someone like Cornyn, who's very establishment and also has had his verbal breaks with the president on some important issues before.
Yeah, and Cornyn was trying to convince the president that those breaks were not significant enough that he should endorse him despite that, but it wasn't enough ultimately. Bridget, let me ask you, Steve mentioned the fact there are now some runoff races, and I think one of the big questions, will President Trump in fact endorse in those races? You look at the Senate race, I mean, that's a significant one. Collins facing off against Derek Dooley, backed by the governor of that state. But that's going to be a big race because the winner of this race faces off against Jon Ossoff. And this is a race that Republicans really want to win.
That's right. And I talked to several Georgia Republican strategists about this primary, asking, do you think Trump's going to endorse in a runoff? And of course, everyone says we cannot predict what the president is going to do. But a lot of folks think that it could go to Collins. And Collins is really pitching himself as an America First candidate. He talks a lot about how he authored the Laken-Riley Act, the first bill President Trump signed into law in this second term. And as you mentioned, you know, Dooley has that Kemp endorsement. Could be some bad blood there between Governor Kemp and President Trump. But Georgia Republicans I talked to point out that Governor Kemp is also still extremely popular, even with Trump supporters, even though they've had that disagreement in the past. And that's because, you know, in their view, Governor Kemp hasn't really personally attacked the president very much. He's kind of tried to move on from that, and that he's been a good conservative governor. So we'll have to see if this becomes a proxy fight in some way between Kemp and Trump if the president president decides to weigh in here.
Yeah, Kemp has certainly walked a fine line, and just so fascinating how President Trump's and the 2020 election has loomed over all of the races in Georgia. Ben and Bridget, thank you so very much. Really appreciate your being here with your great analysis. And coming up, much more on last night's marquee primary races and the president's role in the midterms. My one-on-one interview with the progressive Democrat who won one of the most hotly contested elections of the night in battleground Pennsylvania. That's straight ahead. But first, Raul Castro indicted. The Justice Department charges the 94-year-old former Cuban president with conspiracy and murder, ratcheting up the administration's pressure campaign amid President Trump's repeated calls for regime change. You're watching Meet the Press now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.